Okay, we're going to get going into your next unit now, and this is a really exciting unit. I like this one because it gets into a lot of great discussions and debates, and hopefully, um, and get into a lot of talking about rights, and because a lot of times we get into this concept that, and you hear this a lot, that I have the right to do that, or I have the right to say what I want to say, and all it, and a lot of this other stuff, and in reality, it's not quite the same. Yes, you do have rights. Yes, you do have the freedom of speech. Yes, you do have the freedom to own a gun, to a point, and that is something I've been trying to get across throughout the first three units here. Really, is the fact is that you do have rights, but they are not unlimited. Unlimited rights, unlimited freedoms means anarchy, means total giving up of basically anything that you own, because then anyone else can say they have the right to take your stuff, or the right to defame you, or the right to say what they want about you, or the right to do whatever. We have to have limits, and that's what we're going to be talking about here as we get into this next unit then. So, the Bill of Rights, we're going to talk about the setup of it, which we kind of have already. We'll get into the changes and talk about some of the things that haven't changed in the Bill of Rights and those kinds of things. And then we're going to get into the First Amendment. We'll get into a bunch of the other amendments. There's 27 altogether, but basically there's a lot that we'll get into. But you're also going to be doing a project over this unit. And we'll get more to the project a little bit later, but it is going to be something that I think should be pretty good. All right, here are the 10 basically amendments to the Constitution that was created back in the 1700s. James Madison was the man who created the amendments. Actually, he created more than 10. He actually proposed many more than that. 12 eventually gets accepted by the Congress to be debated and discussed. Of the 12, 10 get put in to the Constitution, and they become known as the Bill of Rights then, and that's what we're going to be looking at. All right, before we get into the Bill of Rights, though, what other protections do you have under the Constitution? Well, basically, there are three very important ones that we sometimes take for granted. The first one is called the writ of habeas corpus. Now, what that means is pretty simple. It is an order that is required officials to bring a prisoner into court and explain to the judge why they're being held. Pretty simple, right? Well, the whole idea of the writ of habeas corpus is that they cannot just arrest you for whatever reason they would want to, pick you up, throw you into jail, and leave you there. And in fact, that's what was happening back before the United States went to war against Great Britain, is we had a lot of the American colonists being detained like that. And you would think, okay, fine, that's back then, that's nothing to do with today. That's very much not the case. And in fact, after 9/11, and even more recently, after the Boston terrorism attack that happened there in Boston with the Boston Marathon there, and the explosions that took place there, and the terrorist attack there, there were people who were being detained, who were being picked up, not being told why they're being arrested, not being given their rights, not being given the charges being brought forward, not being allowed to see a lawyer, not being allowed to get a phone call, none of that. And they were being detained. So it is happening. It does happen in times of crisis. There's also been times when our presidents have created a suspension of the writ of habeas corpus. We've had this happen several different times. We had it happen with Lincoln. We've had it happen with President Bush. We also had it happen with President Roosevelt when World War II. And so it does sometimes, even though this right is in the Constitution and it is guaranteed to all American citizens, does not necessarily mean that it is something that is going to be followed, especially if you don't know that you have this right. The second one is the Bill of Attainder. Now, this is where the legislative act punishes a specifically named individual without a trial. You cannot do that. That is against the Constitution. Nor can the legislature pass a law that identifies or convicts or sentences a certain group of people. Now, here again, what example of this? Well, that's like the Arizona law. Okay, the Arizona law and the Kansas law. Kansas fashioned this law after Arizona, which basically gave the right for police officers to stop, detain, and ask for identification of people they believed would be illegal immigrants. This went to court, it was challenged, and under the Constitution, the Bill of Attainder, you cannot do that. because you're specifying a specific minority group that was being basically looked at and being picked upon. I'm not going to get pulled over by the police because I am Anglo-Saxon white and being asked to see my identification papers to make sure I'm an American citizen. Somebody else who is Hispanic or Asian or such, and even those who are, you can tell that they are from another country. Let's say that they are from Africa, or that they are from Asia, let's say Japan or China, they're less likely to be being used on this act, being asked to see their identification papers. Basically, it's coming down to Hispanic, because that's the group that's being basically stereotyped and being discriminated against here. So you cannot do that. Number 3, ex post facto, that punishes an individual for committing an act that has become illegal, but that it was not illegal when the individual committed it. So you basically go around, doing whatever in your life, and let's say that you're driving along a certain segment of the road, and it has nothing posted there of speed limit, and so you drive through there, and you drive 45, 50 miles an hour, and you don't get a speeding ticket. The police officer sees you, but he doesn't do anything. Well, then 3, 4 days later, the city passes an ordinance that says, okay, that street's going to be now 25 miles an hour. So the police officer comes to your door because he took down your license, and basically he gives you a ticket then for speeding, even though it wasn't illegal, it wasn't against the law prior to the passage of the ordinance there. So you cannot do that either. These sound pretty common sense and they sound pretty simple, but in reality, they are very important laws to give rights, I should say, that gives us these freedoms. All right, I already mentioned this already. James Madison is the guy that created the Bill of Rights, September 25th, 1789. The purpose was to establish a basic set of liberties or rights for all the people. On December 15th, 10 of the 12 that was proposed gets put through. Now, again, he did have more than that, but basically those are the ones that do get put through. The key to the government authority is to the extent and limitation of its authority. That was the thing that Madison and many other of the founding fathers was trying to get through there, is that the government's authority must be limited in what it does. Not that the government doesn't have the right to do things or have the power to do things. It must, if it's going to be a successful government and a successful country. But is the key there that it must be a limitation to that authority as far as what it can do. Okay, there are 3 broad categories of the rights that we're going to be talking about. Of course, the freedom of expression, which is the civil liberties. And that includes the First Amendment, the rights to be free of government interference. Then you have your citizenship rights. That's the Second Amendment, the Third, the Ninth, and the 10th, which we'll get more into those here as we get into the amendments. Then you have your criminal and your civil rights amendments. That's the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th. The Bill of Rights, when they were first created way back in the 1780s, the purpose of the Bill of Rights was basically to limit and put a limitation to the power of the federal government, not to the states. So the states could still pass laws that was limiting your freedom of speech, limiting your freedom of press, limiting your right to own a gun, limiting your rights of religion, limiting your right. The federal government did not institute or plan that the Bill of Rights was going to be implemented and be enforced upon the states. In fact, in 1833, the case Barron versus Baltimore required states to ban ex post facto laws and uphold habeas corpus rights. Well, basically the Supreme Court there came back and said no. Okay, and the Supreme Court denied the states having to have to do that in that case. But it wasn't until after the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments got put into the Constitution. Now remember, those are the Civil War amendments. The 13th dealt with banning of slavery. The 14th dealt with citizenship of not just blacks, not just slaves, but of all American citizens, regardless of race, color, or creed. And then the 15th Amendment gave blacks and other minorities the rights to vote. After they were created in the 1860s, then, over the next 100 years, Supreme Courts would then begin to take the 14th Amendment in particular, which is the right of citizenship, and they would begin to put that amendment and apply it to the other amendments, and then take that to the states saying, okay, you can no longer take away people's rights because of the fact that the 14th Amendment grants basic citizenship rights to all people wherever they're at in the United States. That denied states the rights to be able to do what they wanted anymore. This would become known as the process of incorporation, which we're going to talk more about this in class tomorrow. But basically what it did is it took the other amendments, all of the amendments 1 through 10, and some of the other amendments to the Constitution as well, and they began to apply those amendments to the states, telling the states no longer do you have the right to be able to do what you want to your citizens, because the United States government, the United States Constitution supersedes you. No longer can you pass something that would impose upon against the Constitution. So this became known as the process of incorporation then. The court case that really got this started was in 1925, Gitlow versus New York. The Supreme Court held the 14th Amendment protected freedom of speech for all Americans, and that no state nor federal government could create a law that would ban or prohibit the freedom of speech against someone. Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that case tomorrow. And then we're going to get more into this process of incorporation in tomorrow's notes as well. So this was the end of the first video. We'll get back to the second video presentation and your third, which is also going to be dealing some more with the Constitution and some of these rights.